Hi and welcome back. For most of American history, there was no federal income tax at all. In fact, there wasn't even a law requiring it until 1894, when Congress passed what was called the Wilson-Gorman Tariff Act. This law included the very first federal income tax in U.S. history. But it didn't last long. In 1895, the Supreme Court of the United States struck it down. The court ruled that the income tax was unconstitutional because it violated a very important part of the Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4. That part of the Constitution says, "No capitation or other direct tax shall be laid, unless in proportion to the census or enumeration herein before directed to be taken." In plain English, that means if Congress wants to collect a direct tax, like a tax on your personal income, it has to be apportioned. That means the tax has to be split up fairly across all the states, based on population. But the 1894 income tax law wasn't apportioned, so the Supreme Court struck it down in the case Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust Company. That ruling has never been overturned. Let me say that again, the Supreme Court ruling in Pollock is still the law of the land, and Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4 has never been repealed. This is one of the most important facts most people don't know. The Constitution still protects Americans in the 50 states from direct federal income taxes. The court made that clear in 1895, and nothing has ever reversed that decision. Now, let's talk about the 16th Amendment. Some people think this amendment gave the government the right to charge income taxes again, and that it undid the Supreme Court's ruling and overrode the Constitution. But that's not true, and it's easy to prove. Here's exactly what the 16th Amendment says: the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes, from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, and without regard to any census or enumeration. At first glance, that might sound powerful, but here's what you need to know. This amendment doesn't repeal or even mention Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4, which clearly says that direct taxes must be apportioned among the states. It doesn't use the word repeal. It doesn't even acknowledge the parts of the Constitution it supposedly overrides. For comparison, alcohol was outlawed by the 18th Amendment. But the 21st Amendment made it legal again. The 18th said no to alcohol. The 21st said yes to alcohol. But here's the difference. The 21st Amendment started out by saying, the 18th Article of Amendment to the Constitution of the United States is hereby repealed. That's how our Constitution works. If something is repealed, the document says so, clearly and directly. But the 16th Amendment never says it repeals anything. It doesn't repeal the Constitution. It doesn't repeal Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4. It doesn't repeal the 1895 Supreme Court ruling in Pollock versus Farmers Loan and Trust Company. That ruling has never been overturned. So what does that mean? It means the 16th Amendment didn't give Congress brand new powers over people in the 50 states. It simply allowed the government to collect income taxes within its own jurisdiction, Washington, D.C., and the U.S. territories, without apportionment. This is why definitions matter. Because Congress wrote the laws to apply only to the United States. And in tax law, United States does not mean the 50 states of the Union. Initially, it meant only the District of Columbia and U.S. territories. The Constitution does not apply in those areas. So Congress had the freedom to pass whatever tax laws it wanted for people living in the territories. But instead of calling those areas territories, they called them the United States. And then they wrote the tax code to say that United States citizens must file and pay federal income taxes every year. And we, the people, made a huge mistake. We assumed that United States meant all 50 states. But it didn't. It doesn't. And it never has. So anytime you see the term United States or U.S. in federal income tax law, just remember, they're not talking about Florida or Texas or California. In today's tax laws, they are only talking about Washington, D.C. American nationals, meaning anyone born or naturalized in one of the 50 states, are still protected by the Constitution. They're still protected by the Supreme Court's 1895 ruling. And they're still protected from direct federal income taxes. So if that's true, and it is, that American nationals are still protected by these foundational safeguards, why then are millions of Americans paying federal income taxes every year? We'll talk about that in the next video. See you there.